Okay, so hopefully you can hear me. So our main challenge is productivity and keeping it predictable. So we'll start with the usual company plug. So I'm sure some of you haven't heard of DisplayLink before, so who are we? We're a chip company, we make ASICs. Our ASICs appear in universal docking stations, in monitors, in adapters, and you turn your monitors into USB monitors. Why would you want to do that? You can then plug them into a USB device, purpose being productivity. You can have bigger screens than your device would normally offer you. You can have multiple screens, up to 6 per device, and you can have higher resolutions. We're currently up to 5K on our resolution offering. So that's what we do, we make ASICs. So, productivity, I think it's fair to say UVM has been a great thing in recent years, given us huge productivity gains. I've listed a few reasons there as to why that actually might be. But of course, it's already been mentioned, we have constraints on timescales, budgets, etc., so we need to take this thing further. So where do we go next? What's our next big productivity gain? And how do we keep it predictable? What's the obstacles? What threatens us in our goals? So to pick up the challenges, I discussed this with my team, discussed it with the guys on the ground to see what they said were the biggest things that were biggest hurdles they had to their productivity, and outside the team as well, had a wider audience into these problems. So I'm going to talk about FPGA usage. We're big FPGA users in terms of our ASIC verification, and we're also going to talk about bug fixing. So too much time is spent fixing bugs, and that's something which is completely unpredictable. So start with the FPGA. So yes, we're increasing our uses of FPGAs for ASIC verification. So at the chip level, we do everything pretty much now on the FPGAs. Why do we do that? We benefit from a much larger team of people creating our functional tests. We have hardware guys, software guys, firmware guys, IC designers, all creating test cases that we can use for IC verification. We're all using a common Python framework, so everyone in the company can write test cases for our devices, all writing in Python, same language, same platform, very common approach. Which means then, like I said, we're shifting from simulation to FPGA usage for the majority of the ASIC features. Of course, we have to keep our focus in simulation on the ASIC specific things like embedded PHYs, PLLs, etc., the stuff that doesn't appear on the FPGA. So that's where we keep our simulation focus, and this helps us then to reduce overlaps and remove redundant tests. We're not writing an IC test which is then repeated by a firmware guy doing the same sort of thing. We keep things separate. We can keep things separate, but we do need to keep things portable between domains. And what do I mean by that? So we've got two working environments. We've got the bench and we've got simulation. And we've got two devices we can work with. We can work with FPGAs and we can work with ASICs. Of course, at the start of a project, we have the bench and the FPGAs are the things that we're actually working with. And there's a variety of things that are done on the bench with the FPGAs. There's just a selection of the few things that happen or the goals we want to achieve using the bench and the FPGA. And to that, we want to add ASIC verification. We want to do more ASIC verification on the bench, on the FPGA. But of course, ultimately, it's not about the FPGA, it's about the ASIC. And until the ASIC comes back, the only thing we've got is simulation. So we need to port that activity over into the simulation world, where we can do all the traditional ASIC verification activities, more verification. We can measure the coverage, do mutation testing, stick it into continuous integration. Jenkins is our preferred continuous integration tool. And of course, sometimes, of course, the FPGA fails, but it might actually work on the ASIC because there's some difference between that. So we need to be able to port those into a simulation version of the FPGA, so we can do that as well. But ultimately, what we really want to see is the ASIC on the bench. And again, when the ASIC comes back, we can run those tests unmodified on the bench to do the product validation, future development work, and obviously continue with the firmware and software development. Okay, so that's where we are today. We've got this Python world using FPGAs for a lot of chip level verification. So what is the challenge? The challenge really is how to get high coverage on the FPGAs earlier in the process. So FPGAs wonderful for speed, but in the early days, lots of people write directed tests. Very uninteresting tests. You can do billions of vectors, but they're all very similar, all very uninteresting. System Verilog, of course, conversely is the opposite, nice and random but very slow. So how do we get more random style testing into the FPGAs earlier in the flow, get higher coverage earlier in the process? Synthesizable test benches. So I think Nick mentioned synthesizable VIP. So there's things there perhaps we can look at. We're doing ad hoc stuff at the moment, but maybe there's some framework or some sort of methodology there we can adopt. UVM, great. It's gone quiet in this space. You know, what's the next big advantage? Is UVM something that could help us out in this space? You know, again, what is the future methodology? And also, like I said, we're co-developing with large multidisciplinary teams here, and our software friends are very agile in their approach to how they do things. I wouldn't say we're very much old-fashioned waterfall, but we're certainly not in a very agile process like software guys. But if we're co-developing and trying to reach common goals in our ASIC verification, is there something we need to change in our style of management to approach this and become more agile in our processes? So the key thing there for FPGA challenge 1 is how to get bigger coverage on our FPGAs earlier. Next thing is the reducing time debugging internal code. So we can generate code, we can predict quite reliably how long it takes to build a new agent, a scoreboard, a new UVM environment. It's all been done many times before. We can knock these things together very quickly. What we don't know is what bugs you're going to find and how long it's going to take to fix those things. You can use historical metrics to try and gauge some of this, but yeah, historical metrics are fine, but of course there's always an element of chance you come across a big showstopper at some point. So, and if we're using FPGAs and doing a lot of stuff at chip level, of course that's the most costly way of actually debugging your issues. Doing things in the FPGA, not very visible for debugging. And of course we know that bugs are always mistakes, never intended. So what we want to look at next is how do we improve that process? How can we stop making mistakes rather than investing in the long, complex debug process, analysing the bugs, finding the issues? How do you stop making those problems in the first place? So we need to reduce the occurrence of bugs on the FPGA or in the top-level verification. And of course, anything that does remain in there, we need to find it before we get to the FPGA. So, okay, so the challenge number 2 is the internal debug challenge. How do we spend less time fixing design and verification bugs? Lots of discussions about correct by construction, always human element. I'm not sure how far we can go with that, but certainly what we can do is try and find these bugs earlier in the process. And we know from experience, if we break these things down into smaller units, they're easy to work with, much better coverage, and much greater chance of actually finding the issues. So do we need to get our designers and verifiers breaking stuff down into unit tests, to coin a phrase from our software friends again? Do we need to do more assertions, more low-level stuff, more formal, something that's been mentioned already today? And again, do we need to think about the whole agile process, the whole working methodology that our designers and verifiers work in? So that's the second challenge. Number 3 is the external debug issue. So this may seem like an odd one, you know, tools have issues, get used to it, it happens. But we've got far more tools appearing in the flow, far more IPs from different vendors. No one vendor can provide all your IP or tools, and many different VIPs appearing. And of course, if the chances of failure now is becoming very great. And the difficulty of all this stuff is it's all encoded, it's encrypted, you've got cryptic error messages. It's very difficult to debug, and it's completely non-predictable in the project plans. If you said add 3 months to deal with tool issues in the flow, you'd be told take that instantly straight out of your project plan, go and buy some decent tools. It's something that you can't predict and plan around. And of course you could come across a major hurdle here with a real showstopper. There's also the issue of the third-party code. As soon as you've got third-party code in here that you're dealing with, you've got to filter it out, remove it from the test cases you send. So in our case, which we have examples of spending many days just producing a test case to be able to log the issue correctly and get an answer to the tool flow or the tool issue we have. So I don't think the send us a test case process, which has been used of old, is going to work for much longer. So that's the third challenge, is how do we fix our partner issues more quickly? Do we need more vendor cooperation to actually be able to share information more freely? is there something different in the support model? Instead of sending stuff remotely all the time, can we actually get vendors to come in on site, switch on some diagnostics, do some internal debug, and actually fix the problem on site rather than have to send it away and actually have a small test case? And there's also the issue of the whole IP-VIP. Like I said, there's no one provider can provide us all this stuff to a consistent standard. It comes in different standards. So with all the due diligence and all the checklists in the world, you don't know what you're going to get until you've actually used this stuff for real. So is there something there we can do to improve the standards of VIP, something that the industry would respect and adhere to, and something that the user would expect to see when they buy VIP or IP? So that's our 3 challenges.
Virgin questions. We'll get to the Virgin question first.
At the most graphics, can you really say what's driving you towards using FPGAs so extensively in your verification flow?
So the question was, what's driving us to use FPGAs so extensively in our flow? It's really about resourcing levels. So I've got a very small verification team. I've got 3 permanent verifiers in the team doing complex SoCs. We don't have the resources to write the chip-level test cases ourselves, so we have to rely on our firmware guys, software guys to actually help us in that process. They are very familiar with driving the FPGAs. One or two of them can work with simulation, but ultimately the FPGAs is where they feel comfortable, and they like that real-time aspect of development.
Just adding to that, why didn't you consider emulation flow, which would be based on FPGAs again? Okay,
so the question was, why don't we consider emulation flows instead of FPGAs? So I'm sure when you're, Mike's got one answer there, but yeah, the cost. Actually, FPGAs aren't cheap to employ, but a lot of the driving force is actually the ability to do real-life demos that we can take to customer sites and show what's next in coming along. So we can do, although it's running at about quarter speed of the ASIC, we can actually do real-time desktop extension demos, which we can't do with an emulator.
Again, I did notice that some EDA vendors are now also allowing to do emulation remotely.
Yep, that's something.
Hour by hour basis.
Yep.
There's more questions.
You mentioned do more unit testing. Do you use SPAs? Do you use SPAs in the regular?
We do. So actually, sorry. The question is, do we use SPAs in our testing in line with our sort of more unit testing processes? For whatever reason, we've ended up with VHDL as actually our design language. So we use SVAs obviously in test benches, and our verifiers are the ones that tend to put in the assertions predominantly. 1 or 2 of the designs are putting PSL into the VHDL, but it's still something which hasn't been widely adopted, and I think now is the time I need to start pushing harder towards that. We've got spot formal tools. Maybe that's just, if we get into more formal tools, encourage people to write more assertions and gradually evolve into that space, but it's not something which is very common at the moment.
Hi, Wes. You seem to be implying that VIP is part of the problem rather than part of the solution, which is, I'm sure not what you mean. But could you comment on the benefits of otherwise getting VIP and IP from the same vendor?
Commenting on getting IP and VIP from the same vendor, actually we do. So obviously the benefits of getting the IP and the VIP from the same vendor gives you that confidence it should work out of the box. If the IP comes to the VIP, it should sit together and work, and we have examples of that. We actually prefer to get our IP and VIP from separate vendors to obviously give that third-party view of the situation, which can be quite revealing. There are benefits. It's easy to get the flow working with the same provider, but ultimately we like to use a different provider, not to make life difficult, but to possibly flush out. Like I said, there are bugs in IP and VIP, and very often it's the independent stuff that actually gives you that view of the world.
Okay, good. Thanks. No more time. Oh, a quick one. Quick.
You mentioned you guys developed a Python-based flow, so that you can run FPGA firmware tests on the simulation and vice versa. So was the flow not existing with the EDA companies, and you approached them, and what were their comments?
Okay, so question was the Python-based flow. Sorry, did it exist before?
Yeah.
Why did we develop our own and not get something from the EDA companies? I'm not sure if it is something that the EDA companies have offered. We didn't actually approach them directly. It's really a case of that infrastructure is there, so historically, the ASIC guys have been doing their simulation stuff over here, and then the software guys were doing their stuff over there. They developed the Python flows. They decided on the framework that they liked. They chose Jenkins, for instance, for regression test, and then we've been drawn into this software testing style world. So the Python infrastructure was already there, so the only problem we had to solve was actually how we got that stuff to port simply in simulation. And actually using the SV, but the UVM SV DPI, we can get that to work quite nicely, and that was something we could solve ourselves. We didn't actually ask the EDA companies, don't know if they have got anything in that sort of space, but that's why we ended up there.
Yeah. We have to move on because otherwise we're going to have less coffee. So thank you very much. Thank you.